Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy help define our contemporary world. My guest today is a lady of enormous personal passion, intellectual rigor, who's combined these with grassroots activism and an involvement with the processes of government to try and impact change and make a difference in society. Her work has ranged from areas of conflict resolution, peace, gender and sexuality, human rights, minority rights, and a gamut of issues that concern society in India. She's been a member of the National Commission of Women and is currently a member of the Planning Commission. She has written extensively, and when I was last going through the list of NGOs and organizations she's helped found and set up, the list was far too long to even begin to list them. There were more than 21 organizations that she's been associated with. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Syeda Hameed. You know, the first sort of thought came up when I was looking at your working in the Planning Commission was that, you know, here's a woman from the grassroots who has felt with passion, articulated issues, engaged with the real world predicaments. And this is sort of, the Planning Commission building the offices of government. Have you sometimes felt sort of constrained at looking at the macro picture through files and allocation of resources and the kind of work you're perhaps more used to, of going down to the real people and their real issues and their real suffering?
I have, you're right, you know, it's been a bit daunting, these four walls and this exclusive space, but I have created my own bridges, and whatever I do, whatever policies, whatever resources, whatever is within my purview, I am always out in the most remote part of the country trying to find out what is happening to the Musahar Basti, what is happening to a Muslim mohalla in some small village of UP, and basically, you know, the tribals, the primitive tribal groups. I've been there, so I have really, in my own very humble way, because I mean, I think I'm just done something so small. I think I've linked planning with people, and really tried in my own way to give it a very people oriented. Sometimes we talk of all these things as if there are no human beings in the picture, and I'm always bringing human beings, children, because very few people sometimes think of children, they have no voice, women. So I think that's how I've survived 3 years.
Well, that has also been sort of, you know, the bedrock of your work, that you've been close to the people. But the question really is that very often we feel that even when there are people like you in the system, in the many wheels within wheels, do you feel effective? Do you feel gratified that the perceptions that you bring to the table and the insights that you bring, the decisions that you make or encourage to be made at this level of governance, do they translate down to the grassroots, down to the people?
You want me to talk honestly?
Yes. No, because in a sense that is the great concern, that, you know, are we being able to deliver governance? Are we being able to translate allocation of resources into actual programs and initiatives?
It's been very difficult. People around me are sensitive, they try to understand, but a system has been in place for a long time, and I'm sure many people before me also, you know, tried to open it up. At times, you know, I just don't know. I wish I had a way of taking a boardroom from here to a small Musahar Basti in the Vaishali district of Bihar, which is called of all names Ibrahim Chak, and it seems to have been a small area which has fallen off the map, not only of India but nobody knows about it. And when we talk of Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, education for all, or we talk of Anganwadi is one of the areas that I'm very involved with, you know, that reality, I wish I could just bring it. So the only way I found that I could do it was to actually do my reports in a readable way, because sometimes I find that government documents are they're extremely difficult to read. And I'm a writer, so I have to write in a very simple way because I don't know how to use all that language. So with that and with photographs, you know, trying to make people understand which they all know somewhere, but because I'm, in that way connected. And in that regard, with all my colleagues, we did something new in this planning commission, which I think was initially quite a surprise, but now I think it's institutionalized. And that is, we did something called a civil society window. So we opened up these 4 forbidding walls and all these avans of the planning commission. We opened them up to people, and people from NGOs and voluntary organizations and civil society groups, any group wanting to talk about an issue like water. They want to talk about water, sanitation, they want to talk about toilets, they want to talk about street children, provided an opportunity. So what happens, Rajiv, is that at the time you feel it's what's the use and what's happening, but because these experiences are played out in a situation, then when you're actually writing up and somebody is saying, remember, some little process happens. For me, it's too slow because time is running out. But that's a very woolly answer to your very focused question.
No, sort of one of your areas of concern and passion really has been the issues of healthcare. And again, you're talking about the input, that you bring the input into the decision-making process that draws in civil society, draws in your grassroots experience of visits to these places. But I think from the outside, as in a sense, consumers or beneficiaries or potential beneficiaries of the processes of government.
It's a favorite word, beneficiary.
And we look to sort of the other favorite word that you've mentioned, sort of strengthening the healthcare system, etc., etc., etc. We just sort of keep waiting. When is it going to happen? When are the sort of budgetary allocations, which is sort of one of the areas of focus in the sense of the Planning Commission? When are these actually going to translate into grassroots, actual quality healthcare being available to increasing numbers of people? Our experience, of course, is just increasing privatization. The state seems to be completely failing in this, and surely there is a solution beyond the allocation of resources. And what might those solutions be? You've been sort of, we'll come to your experience with the National Commission for Women and your enormous frustration. Well, let's just finish the Planning Commission in this section.
Well, I just want to say that you're so right that when for one thing, as far as public health care is concerned, the state cannot withdraw from public health. There is absolutely no way. So I don't like the word strengthening, I'm sick of it. But some action has to happen as far as the sub-centers, the primary health centers, the community health centers are concerned. There are no doctors, there are often no A&Ms, the places are built and they are empty, and people are thronging to the nearest from Jhola doctors to Bhopas to registered medical practice, RMPs they call themselves. I mean, they are there for them. Sometimes mistakes are made and terrible tragedies also happen, but as far as round the clock is concerned, but how are we going to get doctors who are paid enormous amount, and the amounts are always increasing, how are we going to get them to work in a village for 8,000, 12,000, 18, even 18, 20,000? How are we going to, these are the solutions. And even if we do a public-private partnership, nobody is really interested in going to these far-flung areas. So I think that, again, to use a word which is used very often in government, the challenge. And the problem is basically how to actually effectively, like you were saying, people are just waiting, how to fulfill their desires, their dreams, and to relieve them of this horrible indebtedness, which if disease doesn't kill them, their indebtedness kills them. So that is where I'm trying to concentrate, and we have this flagship program, National Rural Health Mission. We are hoping to do something with urban health, because urban poor are also very badly off. So I'm trying to see, what are we going to do with outcomes? We can keep on allocating from here, and we do huge allocations. That is where my window, civil society, the fact that we have now we have a voluntary we have a government policy for the voluntary sector. these things seem very far off and esoteric and in books and all, but I think that the realization is so strong that unless people's audit, unless people's monitoring and all comes into play, we will not be able to see, smiles on the so-called
yes.
beneficiaries or the people because of whom we are all here today.
Yeah, in a sense, we almost laugh facetiously because the gravity of the problem is so enormous. But we'll come to that in a moment. You're watching a conversation with Dr. Syeda Hameed, an activist on women's issues and issues of gender and sexuality, human rights, minority rights, and a member of the Planning Commission. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with Dr. Syeda Hameed. You've been a member of the National Commission for Women, and I think you have sort of written extensively, and it's well documented, your frustrations in many ways that cases and problems would come to you, and you've spoken and written about so many cases that you would sort of go out, research yourself, write about. You've done a book with 12 cases, and you have often wondered, what has happened to those files, and have they been shredded or just destroyed at the end of the 5 years holding period. Again, in a connect with our earlier conversation, at least there we were talking about issues of public health and more tangible things where there is an element of resources that are very crucial, but equally in issues related to gender, we're looking at attitudinal problems, we're looking at mindsets, we're looking at issues that are related to something more intangible, culture, prejudices. How do we begin to address these? In India, we have tended to assume that sort of legislative diktat or laws will achieve these ends for us, and plainly that isn't working.
The book that you talked about, if I start at the end of this, I encapsulated my experiences in a book which was called They Hang, 12 Women in My Portrait Gallery, and those were 12 cases that I just selected, and I turned every case into a story because that's what I thought people would read once they can engage with it. There were cases of child molestation, there were cases of sexual harassment, there were cases of Diane, witch hunting, there were cases of all kinds of violence against women.
Some of them
children.
really high profile. This was about a maid at the Indian Embassy in Paris, a school principal engaged with sexual harassment, gets a lot of publicity at a press conference, and they yet all disappear from the map. And this is when a member of the National Commission of Women, with your erudition, scholarship, passion, is leading, in a sense, the charge against this kind of exploitation, and yet
nothing happens. If you ask me to count on the fingers of one hand how many cases were successfully completed in 3 years, I don't think I could count on the 5 fingers of one hand. One case was one of honor killing in Noo, in Haryana, Mewat district, and we thought the case had concluded beautifully. The Supreme Court had given judgment in favor of the girl and the boy that they could live as a married couple. The families were very opposed, but then they were living incognito, and we generally kept tabs on them until 6 years after this event. And I happened to open a paper, and this one face suddenly struck me as a very familiar face. And it was the face of a man sitting with 2 small children. Evidently 6 years after the event, the brother of this girl had found them out and just come and shot her dead. At that time she must have been about, he killed her, she must have been about 26, and when all this happened she was about 16 or 17. So even that case, human intervention turned a success into a huge tragedy. I think that the laws, of course, sexual harassment, now we are going to have an act on sexual harassment. All my cases, this one on sexual harassment, or the maid's tragedy about this woman who was sexually abused in Paris,
by an Indian diplomat.
By an Indian diplomat, and all of these are stories in the newspapers. I had newspaper clippings, but since I turned them into stories, I didn't use them, but to this day I have evidence that these are, so this is what happens to you, me, our friends. people in high places, in the poorest of the poor, and a woman who has been declared as a Dayan and then has been is tortured. Why? Because she had the temerity to actually tie a safa on her head, and because little bit of rain had fallen, had the temerity to go and try to plow her field, and that is against the pratha. Exactly what you said, mindsets. So it was against the mooch nichi ho gayi community ki and all that. So then she was tied to the hull as a bell and flogged almost, she almost died, and then my whole story unfolds. But then what happened? You know, my questions, or brides, whether they're from Hindu community or Muslim community, young girls who were suddenly, you know, found hanging, or suddenly they died of some mysterious ways. Parallel cases running. I go to Ranchi, I see two old couples sitting waiting for me. I'm a member of the National Commission for Women. They're sitting on the veranda. One is a venerable old Muslim gentleman, one is a very respectable Hindu gentleman. Same stories. They don't know each other, they live in the same city, both had young daughters. And in my mind, you know, all these, what could I find for them? So basically, I mean, what does one do?
How do you sort of, you know, reconcile all of this? Yet there is a quiet determination that you have maintained, sustained. You know, you came back after 20 years in Canada in the early 80s, and you have sustained that passion, that sort of, that it is change is possible. What drives you? What you know, despite all these sort of stories of despair and failure in some senses,
You've
what
not
keeps
seen
you
me
going?
how depressed I get. You watch me, I get so down and depressed, but I think I don't know, I just bounce back. I feel that, you know, I've lived such a long life and faced all this, and the few years that I have to go, I feel that this is what I really need
My
to do.
goodness, you're not that old.
No, I'm quite old.
But nonetheless, this you know, what is it? What is this hope, this faith or belief that keeps you going and nibbling away and sort of battering away at problems and issues?
You know, Sahir Ludhianvi said it in one of his songs, which I can never forget, कि जब अंबर झूम के नाचेगा और धरती नगमे गाएगी, वो सुबह कभी तो आएगी. I think if we don't have the dream that the dawn will come, you know, today, for example, you're talking to me today, I was very down today. But then the thought that, you know, I'll be able to talk to somebody who understands, you know, I let all these things, you know, pull me out. This moments of just happiness that I expect, you know, or I'm longing for, it'll happen, you know, just pull me out of it, and then I have no other explanation.
Goodness, that's a really wonderful compliment, and we'll take a break on that score. You're watching a conversation with Dr. Syeda Hameed, member of the Planning Commission and an activist for many, many, many causes. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with Dr. Syeda Hameed. You know, when researching for this conversation, I was sort of taken aback that you said that despite being in the Planning Commission, being in a sense a part of government and the processes and in your position and your background, that after Babri Masjid and after 9/11, that you suddenly felt conscious that you were a Muslim and this was something that was being held up for you. Was that that must have been hugely disconcerting and unsettling after having been taken diversity, or the celebration of diversity, in a sense, so much for granted.
Yeah, it was, you know, my most, if you ask me for one most poignant and important recollections of my life, I was only 9 years old when I experienced it. We were living in Sujan Singh Park, and I went out to play, and the girls, little girls wanted to know my name, and somehow I had, you know, post-partition and all, I had reluctance even in uttering my name, but I had to. So they said, you know, we won't play with you. That incident was such a huge impact on me all my life, and then so many years passed, you know, between the early 50s and Babri Masjid, and all these wounds, you know, healed, and we came to terms, we lived in other countries, experienced the world and so on. And then this, then Babri happened, then 9/11 happened, and suddenly I felt, that before that, through school, college, university and so on, I was just like everyone else. And suddenly I was that Muslim woman, like on my forehead there was a tag which says Muslim woman, and I still remember that I was in a meeting and there was a National Commission for Women, as a member of the National Commission for Women, and somebody wrote about that meeting with my photograph and said, Syeda Hameed, member of National Commission for Women in Pakistan. And I thought, oh God, we're not even able to get over this thing of names. So I think that now, of course, the whole scenario has changed, and all I can say is that again in my own way, and you were asking me what holds me up, is that for one thing I have really tried to study Islam, and I've tried to study what Islam stands for. So when I am able to, at any platform, to try to explain what is the tenets of Islam, Quran, Hadith, Sunnah, and then that also gives me a strength, and that also gives me a pride. I really don't know how I'll cope with it tomorrow, but something which sort of keeps me going.
In terms of policies, and you're involved with policy making, there is so much there is so much discourse in terms of minority rights, the manner in which you identify minorities, issues of reservation, issues of personal law, so many issues around the problem or the predicament of minorities. What are some of the policies, the initiatives that you disapprove of, or that you would feel sort of the state might do? And we were talking earlier of changing of attitudes, of prejudices, of mindsets. What are some of the things that you'd like to see done or happen that would begin to address predicaments such as yours? And if you experience this, can you imagine? We can imagine. It's hard to imagine what other people in far more difficult, compromised situations must go through.
See, there are some set things that are being done, and I think those are everyone is familiar with recommendations of the Sector Committee report, how that is going to be implemented, Equal Opportunities Commission, scholarships for Muslim children and all of that. Then there is the Prime Minister's 15-point program. Earlier also we had a Prime Minister's 20-point program. So many years ago, now we have the Prime Minister's 15-point program. But all of this, I think, for Muslims who have been left behind, and we know all the reasons, post-partition, traditional reasons and all that. So they have to really catch up, and this is a means to bring them forward. But I think what is really important, and we did it in a very small way in our mohalla post-Babri. In our mohalla post-Babri, no government, no authority asked us to do it, but as a community of people, Hindus, Muslims, belonging to various political parties from the far left to the far right, and Christians and Sikhs and everyone, decided in our 13-14 localities in that area, we are not going to let anything happen. And so what we started doing was trying to understand each other and trying to celebrate each other, simple things like celebrating Eid, Diwali, Ramzan and Dasehra and all these festivals, Christmas, Gurpurv together. That, I think, was a hugely important movement, and we thought we will network and build chains, at least in Delhi. But what happens is we respond to an emergency, we are very active for a while, and then, so I feel that this whole thing of trying to understand each other, because government can bring about all of this and make up and so on, but when people really begin to see that their khairiyat lies and their whole peace and their future and their khair salah basically lies in this, that has its own dynamic and its own momentum.
You have written and studied Sufism. Is that also a part of your practice? Is that in what ways do you feel influenced by it?
I'm influenced by it because my ancestor was a very well-known, respected Sufi saint from Herat, and we trace our descent through Khaja Abdullah. He was a Peer of Herat. So that Sufi spirit is
500-600 years ago.
Yeah, but no, more like 800 years ago, since we came to India and settled down in a place called Panipat. So that is in me from that sense. And then I worked on a Sufi saint, Sarmad, who is buried in Delhi next to Maulana Azad, and I wrote a book. I actually translated some of his rubais, along with a beautiful article on his life by Maulana Azad, which was called Sarmad Shaheed. So that had a lot of influence. But what I love about Sufism is that Sufis were able to blend and harmonize with the mahal in which they came. So if they went to Assam, they became Ajan Peers, where they did the Assamese way. So the differences was sort of people just flowed in and out, and they wore tilaks and they wore dhotis and they wrote their poetry in Braj Bhasha and all that. That's so wonderful. So I think this Islam's way of just adapting wherever, that is such polarity between that and this monolithic Islam that some edict goes, this is the way to dress, this is the way girls and boys should sit separately in classrooms and all of that. I think that's really not in keeping with the spirit of Islam. That's why I'm drawn to Sufism.
You have you have written about the need for Islam as virtually any other sort of ancient tradition to how do I put it, to make itself more contemporary, to sort of redefine itself in some ways. In terms of your own identity, experience, practice as being a Muslim, what are some of the elements of it that you practice? The namaz, what are some of the practices
I just
that make you feel that you're a Muslim?
I was never forced to do anything as a child. Parents were very disappointed when I didn't pray, but they didn't impose on me. But almost about 30 years ago, I decided that inside me the need arose, and now I pray. I can't pray 5 times a day. I have reasons why I can't do it. So at least morning and evening I do my prayers. I fast, and I feel, it's a sense of achievement. And then you stay away from a lot that you really need to stay away, at least for 1 month in the year. I fast. This is what I do, like as a routine every year and every day of my life. And then I try to read and to understand the Quran. And I also feel that in this I'm very much one with Maulana Azad, and I've read a lot of his tarjuma of the Quran. I really feel that if we were to really look at the spirit of Islam, it's all there. Nobody has a right to impose any interpretation on me. I have to interpret according to my own light, and this is the light I get from the Quran. So it's all there for me to derive from. So that basically is my belief and my daily practice.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a great privilege and a great learning experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.